Shalom! Izzy here with Holy Language Institute at holylanguage.com. I wanted to read an old story with you. This was actually a story that happened somewhere between 50 and 100 years before Yeshua of Nazareth was born. And it's a story that happened in the Jewish world in Israel. So this is an account from the Mishnah. The Mishnah is all of the earliest Jewish commentary on the Torah. Originally, it was communicated orally, and it wasn't like just commentary. It wasn't kind of like the old Jewish version of Oswald Chambers. Much of it was legal matter. You have the Torah was the law of the land, and so you have judges who would have to make legal decisions. They'd have to interpret the law, and then you'd also have specific cases that would come before the judges, and they eventually accumulated into a body of case law. And so basically that's what the Mishnah was. But every now and then, in the midst of all this nitty-gritty legal material and details that a lot of people would find very dry and boring, they have these thrilling little stories. And so I want to show you an example of this from the Mishnah. So this is from Tractate Ta'anit. Ta'anit means fast, and it's basically it's the tractate that talks about when the Jewish community would fast, what they would do on fast days. For instance, for Yom Kippur, or for the 9th of Av, the day when all the really bad stuff happened to Israel, like the temples were destroyed and everything, or in the fall, if the rains weren't coming, then there would be certain fast days that would happen. So I love this kind of history because this is all stuff from the Jewish world of Jesus and his disciples. So it really gives us an intimate look into the world of the New Testament. And this is an example. I mentioned that this was a story that happened a couple generations roughly before Yeshua, and I'll show you why in just a second. So let's look at this together. And I'm going to kind of just free read it. I'm not going to read it exactly how it's written here. And I'll interject a couple times and show you a couple words over on the Hebrew side of the page here. So, they sound the shofar on account of any calamity upon the public. May such never befall, but not because of excessive rain. So they're talking about times when the shofar was basically used as your ancient version of an SOS signal. Let's say if you were in a city and it got surrounded by an enemy army, or you were out at sea on a ship and you started to sink, or if you were in an area that was being flooded by rains, then you would start to blow the shofar. Everyone would get their shofars out and blow them, and it would be like an SOS, help, basically. So anyways, they're talking about that. And then there are also times when the shofar was blown in a more like in the middle of a prayer service, and it was more of an expression of like everyone's hearts crying out to God. It was almost like, just like you pray through your mouth, you pray through the shofar in a very like just primitive, like visceral way, kind of like just crying out to God. All right. So once it happened. Now, before we get into the story, do you know the Hebrew phrase for once it happened? I want to show you that because somebody's lying about this phrase. Okay, the word here is ma'aseh. Right, ma'aseh. It comes from the verb asa, which means to do something. If you asa, it means you do something. So a ma'aseh is something that was done, something that happened. So like the Hebrew word for the Acts of the Apostles, the first word there for Acts would be ma'asim. So in Hebrew, we would call the Acts of the Apostles the ma'asim. Now, there's this Karaite teacher who he really has some issues with traditional Judaism, and he's worked his way into the Hebrew roots movement, and he's turned a lot of people against anything that is like traditionally Jewish. And basically, all of it is suddenly, demonized as rabbinic. Basically, if something is rabbinic, then it must be evil because the rabbis were evil. Kind of in that. That's kind of the big idea that sometimes people begin to get infected with. And unfortunately, if someone isn't familiar with why Jewish people do things the way they do, and if they're not familiar with the old Jewish texts, it can be very attractive to just say, oh, yeah, the rabbis were bad. We don't have to read any of their stuff. We can just read the Torah and interpret it for ourselves. And I mean, that's a very attractive idea, especially if you're a Protestant, because that's what you've been doing your whole life. You the Protestant world came out of the Catholic world. The Catholics, claimed to be able to interpret the Bible. The Protestants said, no, we can read this thing and interpret it for ourselves. So, the Protestant world is very individualistic. And, basically, if you're a Protestant and that you come from that background, then let's say you start returning to the Hebrew roots of your faith. And basically, you just take that Protestant mentality right over with you, except now instead of the Pope and Roman Catholicism, it's the rabbis and rabbinic Judaism. And, basically your guns used to be trained on the Catholic Church, and now, now you just turned them a little bit over to the religious leaders of another religion. And in my opinion, that's tragic, because along the way, there's a lot of historical misinformation that gets spread, and Yeshua is getting very badly misrepresented to his own Jewish people sometimes. So anyways, if you're somewhere in that mix, I hope that doesn't offend you. I want to keep reading this story with you, but I do want to point this out because so this teacher, he talks about the takanot and the ma'asim of the rabbis as if they're just very, very bad things. And if you actually read the Mishnah, you'll see tons of takanot, and most of them were actually good. Like the word takanot means to like fixes or improvements, and like most of them, that's what they actually were. And they weren't. It's not like they were making up new laws. They were interpreting the Torah and applying it to the Jewish community in a better way. And that's what spiritual leaders have to do. That's what judges and legislators have to do. You take the Constitution and you interpret it and apply it. It's very similar. So anyways, this is an example. Like this is a maaseh. The story of Choni the Circle-Drawer is a maaseh. It's a rabbinic maaseh. Tell me it's evil. It's not evil. All right. So anyways, if you've like somewhere along the way you've become infected with maybe with that attitude, or you just have a real chip on your shoulder against rabbinic Judaism and you don't even know why, except that maybe just the people around you or some of the teachers that you've been exposed to, just put that bug in your head. My hope for you is that you'll just keep studying and you'll keep learning, and that you'll stay away from nasty attitudes, and just instead of just assuming that all the takanot and the masim are bad, maybe go learn what they actually were, and see for yourself how many of them were actually bad and how bad they were. All right, because this is an example. All right, so masim, like here it's more of a story. There are other places where the masim are more like they're like, it's case law basically. It's legal precedents that were set. Anyways, that's necessary in any legal tradition. That's necessary. It's not a bad thing. Okay. Anyway, so let's keep reading out. They said to Choni the Circle-Drawer, "So pray that rain may fall." He replied, "Go forth and bring in the Passover ovens, so that they might not be softened." And then he prayed, but no rain fell. What would you do at that point? You'd be like, oh, shoot. I'm just going to go out there and save face and say, well, I guess it wasn't God's will that it would rain today. What did he do? He drew a circle and stood within it and said before him, referring to God, Master of the universe. And I really love this phrase here. In Hebrew, it's Ribono Shel Olam. So Ribono, that's more Aramaic, if I'm not mistaken. Remember Miriam? She was like at Yeshua's feet after he came back from the dead, and she called him Rabboni. That's like, and I'm pretty sure that's Aramaic too. So this is like a very closely related term, except here it's talking about the master shell of Olam, of the universe. And this is like a really special title for God in the Jewish tradition of prayer. There are lots of Jewish holy men and sages and Hasidic masters who are like they were known for like praying their own prayers from their hearts, and they would call God the Ribono Shalom, if you wanted to kind of say it the Jewish way, the Ribono Shalom. So maybe try that sometime if you're praying your own prayer from your heart and just saying it in your own words. You start by calling God the Ribono Shalom, because there's a real place for that even in the Jewish tradition of prayer. So that's what he calls God. Then he says, "Your children have set their faces to me, because I'm as a son of the household before you." So that's really interesting, isn't it? Firstly, he refers to God's people, the Jewish people, as his children, and then he says, "Because I'm like your son." Keep that in your mind. Then he goes on to say, let's skip to the next page here in the story. I swear by your great name that I won't stir hence, I won't move from here, until you have compassion on your children. Rain commenced to trickle. He said, Not for such rain did I pray, but for rain which will fill the cisterns, pits, and caves. The rain began to fall with violence. He said, Not for such rain have I prayed, but for rain of benevolence, blessing, and graciousness. The rain fell according to their wont, until the Israelites had to go up from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount because of the rain. Wow, so apparently there was so much rain they actually had to get out of their houses and go climb up the hill, the Temple Mount hill. So they came to him and said, Just as you prayed for the rain to fall, so pray now that it may depart. He answered them, Go and see if the stone of Strayers has been washed away. So a famous stone in Jerusalem. And then Shimon ben Shetach sent to him, saying, now this is interesting. This guy lived, I'll actually show you a little bit of an entry from Wikipedia about this guy in just a second. It kind of helps us to place when Choni lived. Anyway, so he sends him a message and says, if you weren't Choni, I would have pronounced a ban of excommunication against you. But what could I do to you? Since you're petulant before God, and he performed your will like a son who importuneth. Remember Yeshua's story about the importunitous woman? There's an old English word for you. So, who importuneth his father, and he does his desire. And of you it's written, let your father and your mother rejoice, and let her that bore you be glad. So, that's the story. I love this story so much, for so many reasons. Firstly, though, before I tell you why, here's a little entry from the infallible source of truth, Wikipedia. Yes, I'm kidding. So it points out about Shimon ben Shetach that he lived from, so basically about a century before Yeshua, and then he died around 40 BCE, before the Common Era. That's how Jewish people refer to BC, before Christ. And apparently he was a great and famous sage. So anyway, so this helps us to kind of place historically when Choni lived. So this is a story, a true story, that Yeshua and his disciples grew up on. Everybody knew about Choni the Circle-Drawer. God treated him like a son, and God answered his prayers for rain. And he could even pray that it would stop raining so much, or that it would rain more, or that it would stop raining, and it would. And he just had this special relationship with God, like a son with his father. So, what do you think of that? I love that story. Something really interesting. Maybe you've heard pastors saying this. Maybe you're a pastor and you've said this before, or maybe you even say it. Yeshua came and he talked a lot about God as Father. He taught us to call God Abba, Father. He taught us to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, Avinu Shebashamayim. And if you don't read the New Testament in the context of the Jewish world that Yeshua lived in, you might be like, oh wow, Jews didn't call God Father before this. This was a new thing. I've heard preachers say that. It's just not true. If you actually read, Jewish history from before Yeshua and after Yeshua, Jewish people did relate to God as Father, and Choni is a great example of that. So, anyways, I don't want to wreck it for you if you believe that. But the Jewish community historically has related to God as Avinu, as our Father. In fact, that's even how the prayer for the state of Israel begins. Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father who art in heaven. And then there's a prayer for the state of Israel. But at the same time, Yeshua was God's son in a special way, of course. And through him, we've experienced the Spirit of God in a special way. And we become his children in a special way. Maybe not even just positionally, as if it's just one of the many titles that we can call God, but really, just like you were born of your parents and your flesh of their flesh, and DNA of their DNA, you were born of God's Spirit inside. And your heart is heart of his heart. And your nature is nature of his nature. It isn't just that God has, pronounced you righteous, wink, wink, nod, nod, even though we know you're an awful poor person. No. God changed you from the inside out. If you have said yes to him, and you have received that experience of his Spirit that he promised in the book of Jeremiah and in the book of Ezekiel, that promise of his Spirit, a new heart and a new spirit, then he actually changed you from the inside out. He's making you a new person. And you're actually, like, the very stuff that you're made of is stuff from him. If I could very roughly use that phrase. So anyways, I want to encourage you with that. So yes, the Jewish community has, historically related to God as Father and called him that. And we have stories about guys like Choni that had this special father-son relationship with God and talked to him on that level. And at the same time, through Yeshua, we have an even more real experience of God as Father, as Abba. So thanks for joining me in this fun little story about Choni and his prayers. I hope it sparked your imagination. I hope it made you more interested in learning about the Jewish context of the New Testament. I hope it gave you a new glimpse of Yeshua and his teachings about God as Father. And I hope it has inspired you in your own prayers, to address God as Rabbono Shel Olam. Just to realize how incredibly special it is that we can pray from our hearts and we can just compose our own thoughts and we can communicate those things and express them to God and see his responses in our lives. Maybe not the first time, just like Choni, but he does respond. And what a wonderful thing that is. This is actually just one takeaway from a course that I am teaching. It's a lesson series called Mishnah Snapshots. We're going through the Mishnah, and we're not going through it like Mishnah by Mishnah, because there are thousands of these little Mishnayot, and many of them are, like I said, they're nitty-gritty case law and details that not everybody would get a lot out of. So that's why we're doing Mishnah Snapshots. I'm giving you snapshots from the Mishnah. I'm highlighting those places that, like this one that just tickle the soul, or that are, really spiritually meaningful, or places that help us to understand the Jewish writings of Yeshua's disciples better. Anyways, if you'd like to learn more with me, come see me at holylanguage.com. Check out our Mishnah Snapshots lessons, and we have lots of other wonderful courses and resources for you there. Our focus is on Yeshua of Nazareth, following him, coming closer to him. Learning a little bit of Hebrew is a way to grow in our discipleship. And if that's your heartbeat, then you may very well already belong to our tribe before you even knew it. So be encouraged in your relationship with your Father in heaven. And hopefully I'll see you at holylanguage.com sometime soon.